ministry, from your church, from the relationships that you have? Where are you ultimately looking for satisfaction? The book of Ecclesiastes is a book that has beaten me many times. How about you? I've read through the book over the past years and not understood it. In fact, I read it again and again, never understood it. I'm one of those who doesn't read fast. If people talk about reading the Bible in 30 days, I'm sure I could do it, but I don't know if I would get anything from it. I like to read slow, and when I get to a point I don't understand, I kind of stop and meditate, and probably some of you the same way. So, it wouldn't be more than about the end of chapter 1, reading the book of Ecclesiastes, and I would kind of get stumped. Get to chapter 6, and it's just like, what is Solomon doing? And the only time when I would kind of find relief in the book is to get to the very last paragraph, chapter 12. And at that point, then okay, maybe I kind of understand what was happening. Struggled with this book for years. And for Christmas, my in-laws gave me a book, a fest trip, in honor of Michael Barrett, who was my all-time favorite seminary professor, just a fantastic lecturer and a man of God. And in that book, there was a chapter on Ecclesiastes. So I read it probably the day after Christmas, and it was written by a friend of mine, and it started to crack the book open for me. And I thought, well, let me play around with it some more. So I opened up some different books in my library, one of which was Bruce Waltke's Old Testament theology, which has been written in the last maybe 10 years. And after reading that, and after reading some other things, the book started, for the first time in my life, to make sense. And I thought, we're done now with the series. Let's try to tackle Ecclesiastes. And I was nervous going in. I wasn't sure that I had quite all the answers to all the problems in the book. Didn't understand every part of it at the beginning. I don't know if I still do quite yet. I hope I'm pretty close, because we are done with the book. But this book has become one of my favorites in the Bible. So, when you're studying a book, you want to make sure, first of all, or one of the first things you do is understand the theme of the book and understand the structure. Well, you read the literature and you find that some commentaries say there is no intended structure in the book of Ecclesiastes. Some commentaries say there are 2 sections, others 3, and others say 4 sections in Ecclesiastes. So you're kind of like, okay, well, maybe, maybe I don't know. And again, I come back to Bruce Waltke's Old Testament theology. If you don't have it, you might want to get it. If I ever preach on anything in the Old Testament, that's one of my first go-tos now. But I read his whole section on Ecclesiastes, and he nailed it. Where there was no doubt in my mind, at least it convinced me, that there were 2 sections in the book, and that the theme was centered around one word. And it is the word that in some of our translations is vanity. So vanity of vanities, all is vanity, says the preacher. Well, what does that mean? In the Hebrew word vanity can be translated that way. It can be translated worthless. It can be translated wind. It can be translated breath. It might mean just a short duration of time, like life is short, like really short. Or it might be me saying that life is just completely worthless. That's kind of the way I had always understood it, and actually still do think that's what it means. Okay, life is just totally worthless. You get through about midway through the book, you're like, it's messing with your head. Life is really just worthless. And then, if you use G. Campbell Morgan's expository method, you trace the argument. Grasping the word is kind of like the new updated version of G. Campbell Morgan. So you track the argument of the author. And it was a little while before it finally hit. But once it hit, it unlocked the book. And it's 3 words in chapter 2, verse 25, that unlocked the book. And we'll get there in a little bit. But suffice it to say, Solomon really is saying the preacher, to us preachers, chapter 1, verse 1, the Son of David, King in Jerusalem, really is saying, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Life is vain. It is worthless. Now, give me a second. Give Solomon a second. What does he mean by that? All right. To borrow some more from that Old Testament theology, the theme of the book is vanity or worthlessness. The Hebrew word there is havel, H-B-E-L, H-E-B-E-L. What Waltke does is he shows the numerical value of the word. In Hebrew, just like in Latin, you don't have numbers, you have letters that equate to numbers. And so you add up the letters and what they represent to get your total number. The number of Havel is 37. Now, if I were you sitting out there, I'd be kind of like, okay, I don't know about this numerology, Chuck. Have you ever read Davis's book on numerology? Be careful, about numbers. Very few numbers in the Bible actually have symbolic value or true meaning, and just adding up 3 letters, I'm not convinced. Well, Waltke slam dunked this. I mean, Havel, the numerical value of Havel is 37. There are exactly 37 occurrences of that word in the book. The middle verse of the book, chapter 6, verse 9, has Havel embedded in it. There are exactly, in the Hebrew, 111 verses in each half of the book of Ecclesiastes. Exactly. That's not English verses, this is in Hebrew. Exactly 111. 37 times 3 is 111. You may not be convinced, I don't know. It convinced me. There are exactly, in each half, 1,491 words. There's no doubt in my mind now that there are 2 sections to the book, but I think that the first 2 chapters are what unlocks the theme and drives the thesis through the remainder of the book. And so today, we're going to survey those 2 chapters, and I'm basically going to be arguing that chapters 1 and 2 are saying this: life can provide satisfaction if we look for it in the right place. Men in ministry, many of us are in full-time vocational ministry here. Where are you looking for satisfaction? If we're not looking for satisfaction in the right place, we may end up, and I'll read this at the end, one of the casualties, that Tom Rainer is talking about in his article, which came out about a month and a half ago or so, 6 reasons why your pastor is about to quit. Okay? There was an article written maybe back in July that had the same idea. Rainer, who has his finger on the pulse of the evangelical church, the conservative evangelical church, like no one else. He is to the conservative evangelical church what Barna is to the mainstream. Okay, so Rainer has his finger on the pulse, and this he comes out with something like, it was August 31st, and then he had a follow-up article later, and there's another one that came out by a different author, basically charting the same thing. Pastors are tired, they're about to quit, some of them. I was able to speak down at the St. Louis Regional, and my whole goal, I didn't have this sermon, but my whole goal was to encourage the brothers there. And literally the week before, one of the pastors had quit. And I was like, oh, Lord, you're sovereign, I know you're in control. But I was really praying that, that you would use your word to encourage him. And one of them had just quit, and that was the talk of, about the 11 churches that were represented there. So I think we need this. I know I do. Let's look at the 7 options that the preacher, Solomon, gives us to choose from. So where are you looking to find satisfaction, Solomon, the preacher, shows us 7 options. And the first one is in chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, where he says, living for myself to the fullest is option number 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities. Think worthless. Worthlessness of worthlessnesses. All is worthless. What does man gain by all the toil? That's not just a job. It's all of life, the grind daily of life. What does man gain by all the daily grind at which he toils under the sun? Under the sun, a metaphor for life on earth. I don't really enjoy that beginning, do you? It's so negative. Thanks, Solomon. I know we're trying to encourage here. No, it will by the end encourage. This option, living life for myself to the fullest, is the most generic of these 7 options. It's kind of the introduction, and it's tended to just kind of be a blanket idea. This option, living life for myself for the fullest, will prove worthless, it'll be empty, it'll be hollow. The toils of life, the trials that we go through, will eventually reveal the stupidity of following this option. If we are living life for ourselves, it will eventually become obvious to us that there's really nothing of value in it, and trying to gain satisfaction out of that kind of a lifestyle will end up leaving us discouraged or downright depressed. The second of the options that Solomon shares is in verses 4 through 11. And here, he says, living life to build my legacy is not a good option to follow. Living life to build my legacy. What he's going to argue here is that it really isn't about us. It really isn't about me. It's not my church, it's Christ's church. That sounds trite, but it's really deep there. It's not about my little plans to become known or to have, the great impact so that people will know who I am. It's not about my legacy. How does Solomon communicate that? Chapter 1, verse 4. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. People pass, they're born, they live, and they pass away generation after generation, coming and going. The earth, it remains forever. It's here. It doesn't go through the iterations of human beings living and dying like that. Verse 5, the sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. In other words, the sun's movement in the sky is repetitive. So is human life, repetitive. The wind, verse 6, blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. The wind's movement around the earth is repetitive. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. The water's movement from streams to sea and back again, the hydrological cycle, you know what I'm going to say, is repetitive. Human generations, what happens on earth when human beings live, breathe, work, move, it's repetitive. The sun's movement, the wind, the water, it's all repetitive. Verse 8, all things are full of weariness. What a person says, the word things there, I would prefer to translate words. Okay? So all the words of human beings, they're just full of repetitiveness. Okay, I'll go sit down. It's just like, more hot air from the preacher. All things are full of weariness. What a person says is repetitive. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What a person sees is repetitive. Will never be satisfied, no matter how many luxurious trips we take to Switzerland and wherever you might want to go. You're never going to find satisfaction that way. It's going to become repetitive. If you had enough money and time to do it, enough, your travel lust, your wandering soul would find eventually, if you had enough money to get there, you'd eventually find that it would be just empty. There's nothing in life that way. That's not where we look for true, real satisfaction. The ear is not filled with hearing. What a person hears is repetitive. Verse 9, what has been is what will be. What a person does is repetitive. And what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Nothing on this earth is ever going to be new. Okay, computers are new, this type of thing. This isn't what he's not talking about an invention. He's talking about the way the world works. Solomon's observation of nature and people have taught him that nothing changes. Verse 10, is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? Okay. It has already been in the ages before us. And now in verse 11, we get to you're tracking the argument, verses 4 through 10 set up verse 11. 4 through 10 illustrate repeatedly in different ways what Solomon is going to argue in verse 11. Let's read the verse. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things, yet to be among those who come after. Verse 11 is saying, if you try to make it about you, try to build your reputation, your kingdom, and your legacy, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be forgotten very quickly. Look back at verse 4. Generation comes and generation goes. You're forgotten. Big names. It's not about being a big name preacher or pastor. It's not about being a celebrity pastor. I saw down at the Shepherd's 360 conference down in North Carolina, Cary, North Carolina. They had a preacher, and he said something about that. I mean, it's not about being a celebrity. There's danger in that for us. Why does this matter to us? You know what? Being faithful, regardless of how big our church is, serving Christ, that's where it is. That's what's important, because even the big authors and big names, within 50 years of their death, they're forgotten. Alexander the Great, we're going to know who probably he is. There are going to be a few names, all right, that may be remembered in perpetuity, but John Whitcomb will be forgotten, utterly forgotten, probably within 50 years, like it or not. As well known as he is now, or at least was now. I mean, if I talk to people in my church, unless they're older, they don't know who he is. Now, they do know who Ken Ham is. They may know ICR, but they don't know John Whitcomb. Because I know he passed away recently, but he was getting older. And he's even spoken in our church. Before I was there, he spoke in our church. Only the older folks know him. He'll be forgotten soon. All of us will. If our goal is to build a legacy for ourselves, it's going to end up being... You're gonna get to an older age later in life and say, what have I been doing? There's nothing in this. This is not good. Lord, what have I done? Not helpful. Third option. of the 7. Remember, life can provide satisfaction if we look for it in the right place. Living for myself isn't the right place. Building my legacy isn't the right place. Third, in verses 12 through 18, living in search of utopia will prove futile. There is no such thing on earth as utopia. No one can create it. No government can create it. Right? The city on the hill, that will never work. Well, some aspects of it can, but the idea that we will win in government, that's never going to work. I'm very favorable toward born-again believers being a part of the process, definitely. I have former students who are in places of high regard in government, but that's not how this country will be saved. It will be saved through the purity of the church and revival in the church. Habakkuk chapters 1 through 3, the whole book, especially chapter 3. Utopia will not happen on this earth. Verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I have applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom by all that is done under heaven. He's applied himself with, if later in the book he talks about the extent that he went to find utter wisdom and to create utopia in Israel. And here's his conclusion. It is an unhappy business. Trying to create utopia on earth ends up unhappy or troublesome to his soul. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and is striving after wind. All is worthless. You say, whoa, time out. This is why I kept getting stuck on the book. How can everything be worthless? We know that some things are valuable. Right, hold on. 3 words in chapter 2:25. That'll be our answer. But right now, follow the flow of thought. He says, I've seen it all, and it is everything. It is vain. It is worthless. And you know what? It's like trying to grab a hold of the wind. A windy day. We have a lot of wind in Sheboygan, and we live in the middle of cornfields, and we're on a promontory. Our house is up. So, wow, the wind can just rip and blow hard. And I can try and grasp at the wind and get a hold of it, and it'll always blow right through my hand. I'm never going to be able to grasp the wind, and that's what, if we're looking for satisfaction in one of the wrong options, it's like we're doing that. We end up with nothing in our hands. Verse 15, here's the thrust of the utopian challenge or the utopian goal. Solomon says, quoting probably what was a proverb even in his day, what is crooked cannot, period, be made straight. It will on the new earth, but not on this earth. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. David, Solomon, anyone who's ever been there. And my heart, actually Solomon wasn't in Jerusalem, sorry. David conquered, right? But anyway, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom. I worked excruciatingly hard to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I wanted to understand everything out there. Sin, good, what people call good, the whole thing. And I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind, for in much wisdom is much vexation. That's not what you're thinking he's going to say. Wait a minute, Solomon, I gain a lot of wisdom. It's going to lead to vexation, you know what? If your goal is to make everything in this world straight, everything in this world perfect, you will go insane. Human beings will not, their sinful natures will not allow it. I perceive that it's all striving after wind, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So for, the Greta Thunbergs and people like that, the Green Movement or whatever, they're so afraid of Mother Earth being, destroyed. They're going for utopia, or the, extreme radical left vision or dream that we can create a society where everybody will be equal and, where nobody's going to be rich and nobody's going to be poor, and there won't be any racism or any social strata. It's never happened in the world. It never will. It cannot. I'm not saying that's our goal, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying there. But none of those things are ever going to come true. And if we as preachers are trying to create a world for ourselves where everything is perfect, it'll probably only be a week, maybe a day, before that perfect world gets rattled, little or a lot. If that's what we think can happen in our lives, with our kids, with the church where we serve, if we think that we can get there, and if that's our goal, you might as well just be trying to grasp the wind. Why do pastors quit? Sometimes because that's what they think they can get, and that's where they're trying to get their satisfaction. I need to save the applications till the end because this is a big text of Scripture. I normally don't preach more than about a paragraph. This is many paragraphs, so we need to move on. Chapter 2 then takes us to the fourth of the 7 options. Solomon is arguing this. Life can provide satisfaction. It can, if we look for satisfaction in the right place. Living for myself to the fullest is not the right place. We're gonna end up somewhere along the way, midlife crisis, and we're gonna be saying, what is going on? Maybe I'll just go buy a Corvette. I guess I'll probably be a really old one, can't afford a new one, but I'll go buy a Corvette, or maybe I should just go to a different church, or I think I need, No. There's not going to be satisfaction there. Living for myself to the fullest, living to build my legacy, living in search of utopia. These are 3 bad options, 3 places where we won't be satisfied. And eventually, we're going to understand what Solomon has already said. There's just worthlessness in that pursuit. Number 4, verses 1 through 11 of chapter 2. Where are you looking to find satisfaction? Hopefully it's not in living to indulge the flesh. Living to indulge my flesh. And when I read that, what would go through my mind if I'm sitting where you are is, I'm good. It's the people in the church that I'm worried about. Now hold on. Hold on. It's not just those who sit out there on Sunday. It's the one right here too, who is just as easily susceptible. And when we're done with Solomon's flesh-indulging list, I think there are 8 of them here. We'll do them rapidly. I think we're going to see that we're probably just as guilty as anyone else in the congregation of trying to squeeze satisfaction out of something that cannot provide it. If Solomon's right, and he is right, it cannot provide it. So what are the 8 different ways that Solomon jumped into with all his might to try to gain satisfaction? The first one is in verse 2. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? Laughter. Comedy. Solomon was rich. I'll say more about that in a second. He could afford the best comedians on earth. Who among us hasn't especially men, who among us hasn't gone to, and I don't know if it's a movie or a set of movies or just television or sports entertainment or maybe video games or whatever it is that you enjoy. Who among us has not gone to comedy or that kind of entertainment to try to, Monday. Oh, Monday, Lord, I can't even get out of bed. Where's the coffee? Oh, how can I find some satisfaction today? I think I'll look for it and see who's playing, or or it's some activity, something like that. Solomon said, I tried it, it doesn't work. Verse 3, I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. My heart still guided me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of life. What's the second way that Solomon tried to find relief and satisfaction? It was in wine, and we could expand that. Wine, beer, hard spirits, or drugs, or anything like that. And I really doubt, I seriously doubt, that anyone in here is struggling with alcohol or drugs. Not like that. Okay? If you know my wife, she's just almost an angel, okay? So people that know my wife well, I'll often tease, I live with my wife, it's really hard. And I'll joke about, alcohol. Look, that's not a joke about anymore. You know that wouldn't be, but there are people, probably people we know, maybe even people in the church that are at least tempted to find satisfaction in alcohol. I mean, alcohol, I didn't get saved until I was 16. Okay? When I was 14, I started drinking. Normal high school American. Parties on Friday, Saturday night. Had a little blue booklet, spiral notebook. On the front were all the girls' names. In the back were all the guys' names. I knew where the parties in our city were. 280,000 people in our area. Grew up in the Quad Cities down in Port Iowa, Illinois area. And so I knew the connections. I would call around, find where they were, and until I got 16, I would ride with someone else. But pretty much every Friday and Saturday night, I was going to parties. When my parents were divorced when I was 9, so when I moved from my mom's house to my dad's house because he had late-stage MS and he needed someone to help him physically, I moved over there with him. At that point, he didn't even have a car because he couldn't drive, and so he made a deal with me when I was 14. He said, first he said, son, would you like to go to church with me? And I was good Roman Catholic churches. There's nothing more boring than that. So Dad, no thanks. It took me about all of 5 seconds. And then about 2 weeks later, so he came back to me and said, Curt, I'll make you a deal. And my dad was not dumb. He said, I'll make you a deal. I will buy you a car if you take me to church on Sundays. It took me all about 5 seconds to say, deal. So I started, he bought me a Plymouth Valari 76, piece of junk, stalled on me the first time I took it out. I do think they did the body work from to repair the rust with the broom. It was bad. It was really ugly, but it's a car, and it was a deal. And when it did run down, we were getting there. But you know what? I would go to church most Sundays with a hangover. Most, not a few, most. I would get blasted on Friday and Saturday night. And then, go to church in a hangover. And you ever seen Charlie Brown in school? That's the preacher, what that was. But you know what? Hard head, thick skull, good Roman Catholic. The gospel did eventually. It was months before you get saved. I'm fine, I don't need to be saved. Didn't know the lingo, right? But you know what? God's gospel did eventually get through to me and radically altered my life right at the end of almost when I was to the age of 17. But before that, I was seeking for relief from all the fear of being in school and the pressures of all that. I wasn't afraid of getting beat up or anything. I was in a really nice suburb, so I wasn't like that. But, there was so much anxiety in life. That's how I tried to escape it. I still have friends from high school that escape it just like that. On their Facebook posts, I have one friend who's from Missouri now, and he's always posting stuff about alcohol constantly. And I'm just like, Tony, if I could just get through to you. He won't listen, but alcohol's not going to do it. Verse 4. And I made great, do you see all the eyes? I highlighted them in my Bible. It's amazing how many eyes there are in verses 1 through 11. But anyway, verse 4, I made great works. I built houses. Okay, so houses. He didn't build one. Rich people usually don't have just one. They have 3 or 4 or many. Solomon probably had a whole bunch. All right, so maybe we're not after houses, but you might be dreaming of the house. And maybe it will come when you retire or whatever. You know what? You might build the house. It's still not going to provide satisfaction. You won't get it from the house. Verses 4 through 6, the remainder, he talks about all the different ways in which he beautified his land. It won't come by getting 100 acres or 40 or whatever you want. Even in verse 7, had a whole bunch of slaves. He got a whole bunch. He had them waiting on him hand and foot. He probably didn't pluck any grapes himself. Okay? Had the ladies, fanning him and all of that, all kinds of, there was nothing in that. Verse 8, look at verse 8. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and whole provinces. I read an article actually recently, a couple weeks ago, about, I think it was the 30 richest men in all of history. So it wasn't just now, but in all of history. And they did their best to calculate. So they were careful to say, we're not exactly sure, but this is what our estimates were. The second most wealthy man in history was worth, I think, and I don't even remember who it was now, but he was worth, I believe it was $400 billion, the equivalent today of $400 billion. And then there was Solomon, who was number 1 on the list. And the article even said, if the Bible's accurate, our calculation is that Solomon was worth, and you're going to shoot because you want to know, it was either 2 or 3 trillion. It was somewhere in the multiple trillions of dollars. Sorry, you can look it up online. I'm sure you can find it. I wish I could remember the exact number, but I didn't prepare it for this. But think about Solomon blew the second closest guy away. It wasn't even a competition. The next guy would have had the little mansion next to Solomon's big one. He would have had the biggest mansion in the world. Solomon blew him all the way. He knew that his 401k and all the riches of the world, does that pull your heart, pastors? You say, I don't make much. Well, you don't have to make very much for that to pull your heart. Money can be it isn't a bad thing unless we love it, unless it becomes our idol, but it can be. You'll never find satisfaction when you get to 65 or 67 or 70 or 75 or whenever you decide to retire, or maybe you won't ever retire. But whenever you get to that place, if you've really been looking forward to what that money will do for you, you will find, Solomon says, you will find that whole thing to be empty, to be worthless, to be vain. In chapter 2, verses 12 through 17, I'm going to just briefly go over this one. Solomon says that the fifth of these 7 options, places to look for satisfaction, is now living for the life of the mind. Living for the life of the mind. Solomon was a very, very, very smart man, the smartest, or at least most wisest man who ever lived. He was a philosopher. He was a scholar. If you read those verses, he dumped at least part of his life into the pursuit of scholarship. And as pastors, that one could definitely tug us. If I could just write a book, I'll get on the map. I'll be known, and people will look at me. You know what? Again, one generation, your book probably won't even be read by more than a couple hundred people, even if it has a run of 5,000. How many of us buy a book and then it sits on the shelf? It's not about trying to make an everlasting name, a mark on the history of scholarship. This is the foolishness of philosophers and scholars. The sixth of the 7 options is living for work. Verses 18 through 23. Living for work. If you live to work, if you're trying to get satisfaction out of your job, it won't happen. It will. You'll find eventually that it's worthless. Again, what are some of the 6 reasons pastors quit? They're connected to that. Things didn't go like they had planned. Person A said or did this and made the situation so difficult that it's just like, why am I even in ministry? I can go and get another job and make more money, and these stupid people, I'm sitting on. That's my wife. All right. Anyway, you could just see how maybe in your soul that kind of a spirit, hopefully it doesn't come out of your mouth, but that kind of, who do they think they are? Well, am I the only one? All right, sorry. It's like, okay, Curt, who are you serving? What are you doing? Are you living for what? Hopefully not for work. The goal of providing for your family by working hard, apart from the 3 words in verse 25. And you know what? Working hard, that goal. Making work your idol is going to produce, in verses 18 and 19, according to Solomon, it's going to produce hatred. Look at verse 18. I hated all my toil, which I toil under the sun, seeing I must leave it to man. I hated it. It created anger within his soul. Might I say that being a pastor, if we don't understand verses 24 through 26, which is where we're going to be in just a moment, we might be right where Solomon was. Angry at people, at self, at everything. I just am sick of it. I don't want it anymore. Give me a job where I don't have to be around people, or give me a job where I don't have to sit and study so much and then people criticize me, or give me just a sales job where I can just go and clock in and clock out. And it's not 60 hours or whatever a week. Just let me be a simple laborer and get rid of the leadership responsibilities. People keep criticizing me. Why? John MacArthur down at the T4G conference, I think it was a couple years ago, something like that. The title of his sermon was Criticism, the pastor's constant companion. And I didn't listen. I wasn't there. I didn't listen to it. I just saw somewhere on a feed somehow that was kind of like, yeah, that hits home a little, doesn't it? Yeah. Whoa, just get me out of here. Living for work will lead. Verse 20, not only does it say you'll have hatred, but in verse 20, I turned about and gave my heart up to, what's the next word? In the ESV, it's despair. Just led to despair. Have you been despairing the last year during the COVID season or even before? Have you just been in despair? Have you been discouraged? Have you been more than discouraged, just depressed, where you wake up on Monday and you really don't want to get out of bed? You really can't hardly move. It's just so hard to get your feet, one in front of the other, to get to the coffee maker and then to walk back from your recliner once the coffee's done to sit down. I mean, have you been there? It might be, if you have. It might be because you're living for the wrong reason. You have a goal that Solomon, thousands of years ago, with the wisdom that God gave him, said was utter foolishness. Total worthlessness, utterly vain. So Curt, would you help me out? All right, this has just been, okay, I appreciate pointing out all the negatives. Could you give me something that's a little bit encouraging here? Yeah, let's get something that's more than a little bit encouraging. This is what unlocked the book. Everything really is worthless. Brothers and sisters, if you are trying to gain satisfaction out of any of the first 6 options, you will find all of them are going to let you down sooner or later. There is no pleasure in those ultimately. Those kind of pleasures, look at Hebrews, what Moses experienced, they are fleeting. There is fleeting pleasure in these things, but it's not the kind of pleasure that brings satisfaction. So what does? Option number 7 is what brings satisfaction. Verses 24 through 26. All right. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. How many times have you read through chapters 1 and 2 and then you get there and you're like, okay, I'm confused. He just got done saying there's no pleasure in all of that. By the way, in the ESV, and I think most, if not all translations, do the same thing. They insert the words in the ESV, it is better for. Okay? The reason they do is because they're making it parallels with statements that come later in the book. Not here. So if you have the ESV, drop those 2 words out. They're not in the Hebrew. There is nothing, now drop out better for. There is nothing, a person, nothing inherent for a person than that he should eat or drink or find enjoyment. In other words, there is nothing inherent in a person that allows him to eat or drink and find enjoyment in his toil. You cannot, you will not find pleasure in eating or drinking or any kind of pursuit of enjoyment. Inherently, it doesn't exist. The translations have really done this wrong by inserting those 2 words when they don't belong. Walt Kaiser, in his little commentaries, when he pointed that out. Oh, thank you, brother. He, by the way, lives not very far from here, if you realize that. There's nothing inherent in these things. So, if there's nothing inherent in life, eating, drinking, making merry, finding enjoyment, that's like a blanket statement of everything he's done. If there's nothing inherent that can inherently bring me pleasure in any of the former 6 options, then what am I even doing here? Into verse 24, this also I saw is from the hand of God. Now, the key that unlocks the book, the next 3 words. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Satisfaction comes only when we serve God and when we please God. That's it. It isn't about how many people come on Sunday morning or how many compliments you get at the door in the back as the people are leaving. It's not about whether you get a raise or not. You might need one, but that's not what it's about. It isn't about how much money. None of those things, no amount of entertainment, no amount of hunting, fishing, watching videos, TV, sports, none of that is going to provide any pleasure if you are idolizing any one of them. Make an idol of any one of the former 6 or any of the iterations underneath those 6 options, you're going to end up miserable. It's just like Solomon. What is the key? All of, or almost all the things that he mentioned in here will provide you satisfaction if they are done with God. Apart from Him or with Him. Apart from Him, all else will leave you empty. Living for Him will allow everything else to provide satisfaction. So, I know some of the things in here you have to put in the proper context. So, like with Solomon, when he says women, plural, it would be woman for us. Of course, he had 300 wives in there, concubines. So, obviously, we wouldn't. There's some things in here we're going to have to slightly adjust to for proper understanding. But you know what? There can be some satisfaction in having a good savings account and being wise with your money. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with watching a healthy, good comedy or enjoying a sports event, or nothing wrong with any of those things, provided that they don't become our idols and rob first place away from the Lord. Jesus, of course, summarizes this better than I'll ever be able to do in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, you cannot serve God, and I know it's mammon or money, and the love of money is the root of all evil, but insert anything in that position. You cannot serve God and yourself, building your legacy, striving for utopia, indulging the flesh, living for the life of the mind. I mean, I want to be accurate when I preach the word, but that's not my goal, right? That's not my goal. Isn't accurate. My goal is to reflect Christ and properly exegete the word, not eisegete, exegete. Living for work, that's never gonna. It's just gonna lead me to want to quit, because all the work that I do is never going to bring lasting satisfaction. No, living for God alone. Apart from Him, who can eat or drink or have any enjoyment? In the last verse. For to the one who pleases Him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. Joy is not happiness. Joy is an intellectual thing. Happiness is an emotional. You can have joy no matter what kind of trials you're going through. You're not going to quit unless it's God's will for you to move on or eventually retire or whatever, however you want to define retirement. Unless it's God's will, you're not going to quit if you are practicing and understanding verse 25. You'll have joy no matter what's going on. But to the sinner, He has given the business. To the one who is following after any of the other options, making an idol out of who knows what. Ladies who are here, it's not going to be your job, okay? It's going to be your relationships. It's going to be your children, maybe first and foremost, along with your husband first and foremost. If I can't make my life and all the relationships in it the way I want it, only, all of this into the chapter, this also is vanity and a striving after me. 6 reasons your pastor is about to quit. How many of you saw this, have seen this? 1, 2, 3. Then I will, it's very short, and I'm ending with this. Here's what Tom Rainer, you probably have heard of him. He's conservative Southern Baptist. He's done a lot of research with conservative evangelical churches like ours. His group has. And he's written books and so on. And here's what he says. About 1/3 of you readers are laypersons. So 2/3 of the readers are ministers, pastors. This article is for you. Of course, I know pastors and other vocational ministry leaders will be reading as well. Perhaps, more than my article, they will be reading your comments. I started in the comments section. It was massive, so I stopped. But it was interesting. Pastors will be searching eagerly to see if anyone has a word of encouragement. They may be anticipating the responses will be a barrage of negativity that they have become accustomed to receiving. Please hear me clearly. The vast majority of pastors with whom our team communicates are saying they are considering quitting their churches. It is a trend I have not seen in my lifetime. I don't know how old he is, but I'm thinking in his 60s. And he's been doing this a long time. He said, I've never seen a time like this ever. How many pastors are considering quitting? Some are just weeks away from making an announcement. I know multiple pastors who have quit since August 31st, including in the IFCA, and not because they were to a point where they thought it was just time to step into a different type of ministry. They are looking for work in a secular world. Some will move to bivocational ministry. Some will move to marketplace. But many will move. Why has this period of great discouragement ensued? Of course, it's connected to COVID-19, but the pandemic really just exacerbated trends already in place. We would have likely gotten to this point in the next 3 to 5 years regardless. I also want you to know that these pastors do not think that they will be leaving ministry. They just believe the current state of negativity and apathy in many local churches is not the most effective way they can be doing ministry. So, they are leaving or getting ready to leave. There are many reasons why, but allow me to share the top 6 reasons. Understand that they are not mutually exclusive. Number 1, pastors are weary from the pandemic, just like everyone else. Pastors are not superhumans. They miss their routines. They miss seeing people as they used to do. They would like the world to return to normal, but they realize the old normal will not return. Have you been pressed by both sides? I have. In some cases, grievously. Grievously, people in the church, not many, a few, who just won't stop pushing me. Get rid of the masks. And then we have others, quite a few others, maybe the majority, who are like, I think it's probably best to wear masks. Not that they always all do, but I mean, to me, I don't really care. I don't know that the masks really do much. I don't know. There's no way to really prove it. I'm not big into the masks. By the way, I wouldn't judge you no matter how you processed it. I really wouldn't. But for me, I've just felt like, you know what? I don't think the mask thing's a hill to die on. So I'm going to obey Governor Evers. I look at Romans 13, etc. Like, I don't think it's, I don't think I have a real warrant to disobey that order about the masks. But you know what? If he crosses any of the lines that are clearly right versus wrong in Scripture, then of course I'm going to disobey. That's how I've crossed it. And so in church I'm wearing them, in my house I wear them, and in some activities I don't. But church, when we're in the building like that, I'm going to wear them. I hope he doesn't re-up it. But some of the people in our church are very serious about masks. We still have some people who haven't come back. And yet I have people who are very, very, we have had, some of the elders in our church have had conversations with people whose voices have just about reached peak. That hasn't happened with me, but at least in one of the elders has had multiple conversations. We've had people who have, been on camping trips and gotten really worked up about the masks and how, this is ruining freedom in America and so forth. And here I'm stuck in the middle, and they feel like I'm the one who's being disobedient to God by wearing a mask. And I'm thinking, wow, Romans 13, you know what? Just like, okay, I'm not gonna get worked up about it. That's reason number 1. Reason 2. Pastors are greatly discouraged about the fighting taking place among church members about the post-quarantine church. Gather in person or wait, masks or social distance, on and on. 3, pastors are discouraged about losing members in attendance. It's probably the same with you. It definitely is with us. We don't have everyone there. Pastors don't know if their churches will be able to support ministries financially in the future. Criticisms, number 5, against pastors have increased significantly. Criticism. The workload for pastors has increased greatly. How many phone calls did you need to make in the first couple months with the shutdown? Unbelievably. We divided all the people in the church among the 3 elders. It took a long, long time to minister to people on the phone. Okay? Don't want to go back to that willful the devil. Lord, spare us of a real one. Pastors are burned out, beaten up, and downtrodden. Many are about to quit. You may be surprised to discover your pastors among them. Brothers, I don't know that anyone here is among them. But if you are considering quitting ministry because of COVID and its, fallout or many other reasons, can I encourage you to go to Ecclesiastes, read chapters 1 and 2, but focus on chapter 2, verses 24 and 25, especially 25. Apart from God, you'll have no satisfaction. I think the reason that pastors move out of ministry, if it's not God's will for them to do something else, the reason they do more often than not is that they've been seeking for satisfaction in one of the former 6 options.